So you've probably been hearing the name Pam Bondi a lot lately. She's the nation's top lawyer, the Attorney General. And while she's been in the public eye for a long time, a really intense congressional hearing just put her and the Justice Department right under the microscope. So we're going to break down exactly what went down and, more importantly, why you should care.
Wow. Getting Orwellian? That is a heavy thing to say, especially coming from someone like Representative Jamie Raskin. He's the top Democrat on a really powerful committee, and what he's saying here, it's a huge deal. He's basically accusing the Department of Justice of spying on Congress. Let that sink in.
So where did this all happen? Well, it was during this super tense hearing in the House. They were talking about the Jeffrey Epstein files, that massive, sensitive trove of documents that Congress is supposed to be looking through. But here's the twist. The explosion that happened in that room wasn't really about what's in the files. No, it was about who was watching the lawmakers as they were reading them.
And that brings us to the heart of it, what's being called the search history hearing. The subtitle here says it all: allegations of inappropriate surveillance against Congress. This is where things get really wild.
Okay, picture this. During the hearing, a photographer snaps a picture of Attorney General Bondi. And what's she holding? A piece of paper with the title Jayapal Pramila Search History. Pramila Jayapal is a congresswoman, and this document seemed to be a list of the exact Epstein files she'd been looking at in a secure facility. I mean, the implication was just boom, explosive. It looked like the DOJ was keeping tabs on the very people who were supposed to be keeping tabs on them.
As you can imagine, this led to a pretty intense showdown. Representative Jayapal was furious. She accused the DOJ of spying on members. But Bondi's response? She basically shut it all down, called it theatrics, and said, "I'm not going to get in the gutter." She completely refused to get into the details of it.
So this whole blow-up really makes you wonder, right? Who is Pam Bondi? To really get what's happening now, we've got to go back and look at her career, her path from a state prosecutor all the way to becoming the U.S. Attorney General. Okay, so her career goes back a ways. She started out in the 90s as a prosecutor in Florida. Then she climbs the ladder, becoming the state's first ever female attorney general, which is a pretty big deal. But after that, her career really starts to merge with Donald Trump's. She was on his legal team during his first impeachment, worked as a lobbyist, and then, in February 2025, she gets the top job, U.S. Attorney General.
Now, to be fair and balanced, we have to talk about her time as Florida's AG. She got a ton of credit from both sides of the aisle for how she went after the opioid crisis. She was super aggressive in shutting down those pill mills, and the numbers show it worked. Oxycodone deaths dropped by over 50% on her watch. It was so effective that a CDC director called it an unprecedented national achievement. So that's a huge part of her record.
Okay, but that's not the whole story. Alongside those big wins, her career has also had its share of controversies. And these aren't new. They've followed her for years, raising questions about her political loyalties long before she ever got to Washington, D.C. You've probably heard about this one. It's the whole Trump University donation thing. The allegation is basically, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. So here's the timeline. Bondi's office in Florida was thinking about joining a lawsuit against Trump University for fraud. Right around that time, she personally asked Donald Trump for a campaign donation. A few days after his foundation sent a $25,000 check, her office announced they weren't joining the lawsuit. Now, it's really important to get both sides here. Bondi and Trump have always said there was absolutely no connection between the two things, zero wrongdoing. And legally, our prosecutor looked into it and said there wasn't enough evidence to charge anyone with bribery. But it's also a fact that Trump ended up paying a massive $25 million settlement over those lawsuits, plus a fine to the IRS because that donation came from his charity, which is a big no-no.
Then there's her role after the 2020 election. This is another big one. She was working for the Trump campaign, actively trying to cast doubt on the vote count in Pennsylvania. She even went on TV and called legally cast mail-in ballots fake ballots. And this came up again during her confirmation hearing to become Attorney General. When she was asked point blank if Trump lost the election, she wouldn't say yes. She just said that Joe Biden is the current president.
Okay, so all of this history, the good and the controversial, brings us to a really fundamental question about the job itself. Being the Attorney General is a tricky balancing act. You're caught between loyalty to the president who gave you the job and your duty to the law and the American people.
So what is the job supposed to be? Well, if you ask government ethics experts, they'll tell you the Attorney General is supposed to be independent. They're kind of like an internal check on a president's administration, making sure that raw politics doesn't get in the way of the law.
And this quote really nails the challenge. It says an AG has to resist manifold and intense political pressure, even from the person they have the closest personal and political kinship with, the president. In other words, your loyalty isn't supposed to be to the guy in the Oval Office. It's supposed to be to the Constitution.
And that's why Pam Bondi's history matters so much in this conversation. Critics look at her past, the Trump University donation, her work on the 2020 election, her role on his impeachment team, and they see a pattern. They argue that it shows a loyalty to one person, Donald Trump, that might conflict with the independence the job demands.
So after all that, where are we now? With this whole search history thing blowing up, it's a good time to step back and just separate the cold, hard facts from the stuff we still don't know.
All right, let's break it down. What we know for sure. The Department of Justice is under fire for allegedly spying on lawmakers. We know Representative Raskin has officially asked for an Inspector General investigation. And we definitely know Bondi has a long and documented history of defending Donald Trump. Now for the big question marks. What's unclear is how the DOJ is going to officially answer these allegations. And we just don't know yet if any real institutional changes will come out of all this pressure from Congress.
And in the end, everything we've talked about, the hearing, her history, the job itself, it all boils down to one huge, fundamental question. For an attorney general, where does loyalty to a president stop? And where does the duty to the public begin? It's not just a political question. It's a question that gets to the very heart of what the Department of Justice is supposed to be.